Snow fell thick and unforgiving over the Montana wilderness, turning the forest into a grave of silence. Beneath that untouched white, an old man lay broken, hidden, and running out of time. No one was supposed to find him until a former Navy SEAL stepped off a forgotten road with his canine at his side. The dog stopped, ears locked forward, the kind of stillness that means danger is close. What they uncovered in the snow would turn a rescue into a hunt and reveal that even in the darkest winter, miracles can still come on four paws. Where are you watching from? Please like, subscribe, and stay with us for this story. Winter pressed down on the mountains of Montana with steady, merciless weight. Snow fell thick and soundless, sealing the forest in white and swallowing every trace of color, movement, and warmth. Reese Callahan drove slowly along the old maintenance road, both hands firm on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the narrowed path ahead. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with a frame shaped by years of disciplined training rather than vanity. His face carried hard angles, softened only slightly by a short, uneven beard he no longer bothered to keep perfect. A pale scar traced the line of his jaw, the kind that came from metal moving too fast. His hair, once regulation short, had grown just long enough to curl under a wool cap, dark with streaks of early gray that winter seemed to bring out. Reese had been a Navy SEAL for nearly 2 decades. The job had taught him control, silence, and how to keep fear folded neatly behind the ribs. It had also taught him what happened when trust failed. He left the teams not in disgrace, but in exhaustion, carrying memories that refused to stay buried. Montana was supposed to be quiet, empty, a place where no one asked questions, and the snow erased footprints before they could turn into stories. In the passenger seat sat Coda. Coda was an 8-year-old Belgian Malinois German Shepherd mix, lean and powerful, with a sable coat darkened along the spine and pale amber eyes that never stopped measuring the world. His muzzle had begun to gray, especially around the eyes, giving him the look of a veteran who had survived more than he let on. Coda had worked beside Reese for years, tracking, perimeter security, extraction support. He was not loud, not playful, not a dog who wasted motion. Every movement had purpose. Every stillness meant something. When Reese pulled the truck to a stop, Coda lifted his head immediately. The road ahead looked untouched, snow drifting in soft curves over gravel and ice. Pines rose on either side like watchmen, branches sagging under fresh weight. Reese cut the engine. The silence pressed in so tightly his ears rang. He opened the door and cold air snapped across his face, sharp and clean enough to hurt. Coda stepped out and froze. His ears locked forward. His tail stiffened, not raised, not wagging. He lowered his head and sniffed the snow, slow and deliberate, nostrils flaring. Reese watched the change with practiced attention. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't wildlife. "What do you have?" Reese murmured, voice low, steady. Coda took 3 careful steps forward, then stopped again. He pawed once at the snow, light and controlled, then backed away half a step as if reconsidering. Reese moved closer and crouched, brushing snow aside with a gloved hand. There, barely visible beneath the drift, was a footprint. It was wrong, not animal, not machine. A boot print, shallow and uneven, the heel digging deeper than the toe, as if the person had stumbled. Reese straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. The forest remained still. No birds, no wind, just snow falling in patient silence. The tracks continued, faint and irregular, angling away from the road and into the trees. "Coda," Reese said quietly. The dog moved ahead, cautious but intent. Reese followed, boots crunching softly. With each step, the tracks grew harder to see, half erased by fresh snowfall. Whoever had made them had been here recently, very recently. 10 yards in, Coda stopped again. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then let out a low, restrained growl that vibrated through his chest without breaking the silence. Reese felt his pulse shift, sharp and focused, the way it used to before night operations. He knelt and brushed snow aside, where Coda stared. A wool glove lay half buried, fingers torn open, the fabric darkened by ice and dirt. Reese picked it up. It was old, cheap, the kind worn by someone who fixed things outdoors or lived without heat. A faint smear of red stained the inside seam, already freezing into the fibers. Blood. Reese exhaled slowly, breath fogging the air. His mind moved through possibilities with controlled speed. Injury, exposure, someone lost, or someone running. Coda's attention snapped toward the deeper forest. Reese followed his gaze and heard it. Cock, cock. The sound was faint, metallic, irregular, not echoing, not wind, like metal striking metal with failing strength. It came again, farther left this time, then stopped. Coda went rigid, every muscle in his body locked, as if someone had flipped a switch. His ears flattened slightly, not in fear, but calculation. Reese rose to his feet, heart steady but alert, senses stretching outward. "Easy," Reese whispered, though his own nerves were coiling tight. He took one step toward the sound. Nothing. The forest held its breath. Reese glanced back toward the road. His truck sat alone, already collecting snow, the world beyond it erased. No signal, no witnesses, just him, the dog, and whatever waited among the trees. Another sound came, closer this time. Cock. Reese felt the weight of choice settle into his chest, heavy and familiar. He had come here to disappear, to let winter bury the past. But someone else had already been buried by it, or was about to be. Coda turned his head slightly, eyes meeting Reese's. The question wasn't whether to follow. It was whether the sound ahead was a plea for help, or the bait that came before the trap closed. The shack stood crooked beside the frozen creek, half hidden by snow-laden branches. Its wooden walls were dark with age, the grains split and warped from decades of cold. The roof sagged under white weight, and a thin line of ice hung from the edge like a blade. Reese approached slowly, one hand resting near his belt, the other loose at his side. Coda moved first, nose low, steps measured. The dog paused at the threshold and did something Reese rarely saw. He stayed silent. No bark, no warning growl. Just a steady, controlled breath and eyes locked on the darkness inside. Coda only did that when noise was a risk, when whatever waited ahead was alive, fragile, and could disappear forever with the wrong sound. Reese eased the door open. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of damp wood, rusted metal, and something faintly coppery. Blood, old, frozen, but unmistakable. In the corner, against the far wall, lay a man. The old man was thin to the point of sharpness, his body folded in on itself as if trying to conserve heat. He wore layers that didn't quite match, flannel under a canvas coat, patched at the elbows, work pants stiff with ice. His boots were mismatched, one newer than the other, both worn down at the heels. His face was deeply lined, not just by age, but by years of exposure. A long gray beard framed a mouth cracked from cold, and his skin had the dull grayish tone of someone who had been losing a quiet battle with winter. White hair clung to his scalp beneath a knit cap pulled low, the fabric stretched thin from use. His right leg was wrong. Reese saw it immediately. The angle, the swelling pushing against torn fabric, the dark stain already frozen into the snow beneath him. The injury was severe, untreated, and old enough to have stolen strength from the rest of his body. The man stirred when Reese stepped closer. His eyes opened slowly, pale blue and unfocused at first, then sharpening with awareness. Fear flickered there, not wild, not frantic, but restrained. A man who had learned that panic wasted energy. "Don't," the old man whispered, voice thin and rough. "Don't turn on the light." Reese stopped moving. "I won't," he said quietly. "You're safe for now." The words sounded fragile even to him. Coda entered fully then, padding across the floor with deliberate care. He lay down beside the old man, close enough that his warmth could be felt, his body angled outward toward the door. The dog did not touch the injury. He did not lick. He simply stayed. The old man's breathing eased a fraction. Reese knelt and set his pack down. He worked without rushing, pulling out the thermal blanket and wrapping it around the man's shoulders. The fabric crinkled softly. The old man flinched at first, then relaxed as heat returned inch by inch. Reese examined the leg carefully. The ankle was swollen, discolored, possibly broken. Exposure had already begun to take its toll. Reese felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the quiet anger that came when someone had been left like this. "What's your name?" Reese asked. "Silas," the man answered after a moment. "Silas Mercer." 72, Reese guessed, maybe more. His voice was steady despite the pain, carrying the cadence of someone used to working alone, someone who didn't waste words. Reese stabilized the leg with practiced hands, patting it before securing a splint from his kit. Silas clenched his jaw, breath shuddering, but he did not cry out. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Coda remained still, too still. Reese finished securing the injury and adjusted the blanket. He was aware of time now, not in minutes, but in shrinking margins. Night was closing in, snow was falling harder, and something in the woods had not gone away. Coda's ears twitched. His head lifted slowly, eyes fixing on the narrow strip of darkness beyond the doorway. The fur along his neck rose, not bristling, just lifting enough to signal alert. Reese felt it then. That sense, old and unwelcome, that they were no longer alone. He rose to his feet, careful not to make sound. He glanced toward the door. Outside, the snowfall thickened, muffling the world. Visibility dropped to a few yards at best. Coda shifted position, placing himself squarely between Reese, Silas, and the door. The old man noticed. His fingers tightened weakly around the edge of the blanket. His breathing grew shallow, eyes darting toward the soundless night. Reese leaned down, voice low. "Can you stand?" Silas hesitated, then nodded once. For a bit. Reese braced him, lifting carefully. Silas was lighter than he should have been, his weight unbalanced, fragile. Reese adjusted, bearing most of the load. They took a single step toward the door. Coda's head snapped sharply to the left. Snow crunched outside, not loud, not close enough to pinpoint, but deliberate. Coda's body went rigid, every muscle coiled tight. He did not bark. Reese stopped moving. The shack seemed to shrink around them, walls pressing inward as the storm closed the forest off from the rest of the world. Whatever was out there had come very close. They did not leave the shack by the door. Reese waited until the snow thickened enough to soften sound, then guided Silas through the back wall where old boards had warped away from the frame. Cold rushed in immediately, biting harder than before. Reese adjusted his grip, taking more of the old man's weight, feeling how fragile Silas had become. Bones light, balance unreliable, every step a calculation. Coda moved first. The dog advanced low and silent, nose skimming inches above the snow. His gait changed almost immediately. He veered left, then right, tracing a path that made no sense to a human eye. Reese trusted it without question. They moved downslope, away from the creek, into denser timber where the wind cut unevenly and snow piled in deceptive drifts. After 20 yards, Coda stopped and turned sharply, pulling Reese off a straight line. Reese caught it then. A smell, faint, sharp, wrong. Gasoline. Not fresh enough to sting the nose, but not old enough to belong to a forgotten tool. Reese felt his shoulders tighten. Gasoline meant machines, machines meant people, and people meant planning. Coda skirted a shallow drift, forcing Reese to step wide with Silas. When Reese looked back at the spot they avoided, he saw why. Beneath a thin layer of snow lay a loop of steel wire, half buried, tensioned to a bent sapling. A snare, not meant for deer, too high, too tight. Reese swallowed and guided Silas around it. Silas noticed the wire and flinched. His breathing quickened, and Reese felt the old man's fingers dig weakly into his sleeve. "They put those everywhere," Silas whispered, the words scraping out of him like they cost something. "Not to catch, to slow." Reese didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes were already scanning ahead, marking shapes that didn't belong. Snow disturbed in straight lines. Branches snapped clean instead of broken by weight. Coda changed direction again. They passed through a stand of firs where the ground dipped sharply. Reese nearly lost footing when his boot slid over something hard. He looked down and brushed snow aside with his glove. A tire track. Fresh, narrow, not a snowmobile, too shallow. "Someone drove this," Reese murmured. Silas nodded once. His face had gone paler, eyes shadowed, but his mind seemed sharper now, fear pulling him fully awake. Reese adjusted his grip and urged them forward. Coda stopped at a tree near the edge of a clearing. He pawed at the base once, then again, digging quickly. Snow sprayed aside, revealing a dark smear against the bark and a shallow trench carved into the ground beneath. Someone had slipped here, fallen hard, been dragged back up. Reese straightened slowly. This wasn't random. This was a perimeter. They were being funneled. Silas's breath trembled. He leaned heavily against Reese now, exhaustion winning ground. Reese guided him behind the tree and crouched, keeping his profile low. "Coda," he whispered. The dog froze, ears pivoting, body angled toward the clearing. He was no longer tracking a trail. He was tracking people. Reese felt the pressure build behind his eyes, the familiar narrowing of focus that came before violence. He didn't want it, but it was there. Silas shifted weakly. "I didn't mean to take it." Reese glanced at him. "Take what?" Silas swallowed. His face tightened, lines deepening, as if he were bracing for a blow that didn't come. "The station," he said quietly, "up on the ridge, the old observation post." Reese waited. "I was fixing the generator," Silas continued. "Storm knocked it out. They said it was urgent, needed eyes back online." "Who's they?" Silas shook his head. "Didn't know, didn't ask. Just voices on the radio." Coda's head turned slightly, but he stayed silent. Silas closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "I heard something while I was working, not meant for me, talking about roots, about moving things while the snow covered tracks." Reese felt a cold thread slide down his spine. Silas reached into the inside pocket of his coat with shaking fingers. Reese tensed, then relaxed when the old man pulled out a small, sealed pouch, no larger than a deck of cards. Its plastic surface was scuffed, edges reinforced. "I took this," Silas said. "Didn't know what it was, just knew it wasn't mine." Reese didn't touch it. "And then?" he asked. "They chased me," Silas said simply. "Didn't shoot, didn't shout. Just kept me running until my leg gave out." Reese glanced toward the clearing. Snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, erasing edges. Somewhere out there, people were moving with purpose. "They thought the cold would finish it," Silas added. "I think they were right." Reese tightened his jaw. Coda stiffened suddenly. His head snapped toward the trees beyond the clearing. His ears flattened, tail rigid. He let out a single, low breath through his nose, a warning Reese felt more than heard. Reese shifted, placing his body between Silas and the open ground. Figures moved in the distance, not running, not searching wildly, closing. The lake opened before them like a sheet of pale glass, wide and deceptively calm. Snow lay smooth across its surface, unbroken, reflecting the dim winter light so evenly it erased depth and distance. Reese slowed, instinct tightening his chest. Open ground was exposure. Open ground was where mistakes became final. Coda stopped short. The leash snapped taut as the dog leaned back with sudden force, paws digging into the snow. His ears flattened, and his body angled away from the ice, every muscle refusing the direction Reese had chosen. Coda did not bark. He did not whine. He simply would not move. Reese felt the warning before he understood it. He crouched at the edge of the lake and brushed snow aside with a gloved hand. Beneath the powder, the ice looked wrong, clouded, spider-webbed with faint fractures that radiated outward in deliberate lines. Someone had swept the snow here, not to clear a path, but to disguise weakness. Thin ice masked to look untouched. A trap. Reese's jaw tightened. He scanned the far shore and saw it then. A narrow corridor where the snow had been disturbed just enough to guide movement toward the weakest point. The lake was not a shortcut. It was a mouth. Behind him, Silas shifted unsteadily, breath ragged. The old man's face had gone ashen, eyes fixed on the ice as if he recognized it. Reese felt Silas's weight sag heavier into his side. "Don't," Silas murmured, barely audible over the wind. They like the quiet." Reese didn't answer. He eased them back a step, careful to keep his boots on solid ground. Coda adjusted instantly, placing himself between Silas and the lake, body low and tense, amber eyes locked on the ice as if it might move. Then the lights appeared. At first they were only pinpricks, bobbing at the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Flashlights, hooded to narrow beams. They moved in a pattern, two advancing, one holding back, spacing that spoke of habit and coordination rather than panic. Reese counted without thinking. At least 3, possibly more. He pulled Silas with him toward the right, edging back into the cover of the trees. Coda pressed close, shoulder brushing Reese's knee, his breath slow and controlled. The dog let out a low, restrained growl, more vibration than sound, a warning meant for Reese alone. A metallic clang rang out suddenly. Something struck the trunk of a nearby pine and dropped into the snow with a dull thud. Reese flinched on instinct, pulling Silas down with him. The object was small, dark, half-buried, metal, heavy enough to travel with force. A message, not an attack. "They know where you are." Reese shifted his weight, heart steady despite the rush. He felt the old training surface, cool and precise. Movement, angles, time. The wind shifted, carrying voices now, low, indistinct, stripped of words by distance and snow. Reese caught silhouettes between trunks, men bundled in winter gear, faces hidden by scarves and hoods. One moved differently from the others, broader in the shoulders, deliberate in every step. He carried himself like someone used to giving instructions and watching them obeyed. Reese filed the detail away. Coda's ears flicked, tracking the change. He angled his body again, steering Reese and Silas farther from the lake's edge. The dog's refusal earlier had not been fear. It had been calculation. Reese scanned the ground and spotted what Coda had already marked, a faint ridge where snow drifted deeper, the land rising just enough to offer cover. He guided Silas behind it, easing him down carefully. Silas's hands trembled as he braced himself, pain etched into every line of his face. Reese knelt, voice barely above the wind. "Stay low, don't move unless I tell you." Silas nodded once, jaw clenched. Reese shifted his pack and reached for the satellite messenger clipped to the strap. The screen flickered weakly in the cold. 1 bar, maybe 2. He angled it skyward, shielding it from the wind with his body. Coda remained still, eyes never leaving the lights. Another metallic sound rang out, closer this time. The pursuers were closing the distance, tightening the circle without rushing. They were patient. They trusted the lake and the cold to do the rest. Reese felt a flicker of anger rise and tamped it down. Anger was loud. He needed quiet. The messenger chirped once, brief, uncertain. Reese pressed the emergency signal, holding it longer than recommended, praying the sky would cooperate. Coda's head snapped left. Reese followed the dog's gaze and saw movement at the tree line to their right. A shadow broke away from the others, cutting across the snow toward the ridge, fast, confident. Reese tightened his grip on Silas's shoulder and shifted his stance, placing himself between the old man and the oncoming shape. Coda stepped forward in unison, silent as falling snow. The shadow stopped short of the ridge. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the ice behind them gave a low, hungry groan, a sound so deep it vibrated in Rhys's bones. A thin line of dark water seeped up through the snow where someone had stepped too close to the trap. The lake was not done telling its truth. The storm arrived all at once. Wind slammed through the trees, snapping branches and lifting snow into blinding sheets that erased distance and direction. Rhys didn't hesitate. He pivoted away from the ridge and half-carried Silas downslope, boots sliding, until Coda veered sharply right and led them toward a narrow cut in the earth. The drainage tunnel was older than the road above it, poured concrete cracked by decades of freeze and thaw. Its mouth yawned just wide enough for a man to crawl through, half hidden by drifted snow and scrub brush bent low by the wind. Rhys guided Silas inside first. Cold changed character in the tunnel. It went still, heavy, pressing in from every side. Water had once rushed through here. Now only ice remained, slick and black along the floor. Rhys eased Silas down against the curved wall, patting him with the last of the blanket and bracing his injured leg so it wouldn't shift. Coda turned and lay across the entrance. He did not block it fully. He positioned himself just enough to control the line of sight, his body angled so that if anyone looked in, they would see only shadow and drifting snow. His ears rotated constantly, small movements tracking sound through chaos. His chest rose and fell, slow and steady, a restraint that cost him effort. Rhys clipped the leash short and anchored it around his wrist. He pulled the satellite messenger free again, thumb numb as he coaxed the screen awake. The battery icon blinked red. One attempt left, maybe two if luck was generous. He angled the device upward, away from the tunnel's mouth, and pressed the emergency signal. The screen flickered. Once, twice, then went dark. Rhys closed his eyes for half a second and opened them again. Outside, light swept across the snow. A flashlight beam slid past the tunnel entrance, thin and searching, then returned, slower this time. Rhys felt Silas tense beside him. The old man's breath hitched, then steadied as he pressed his forehead to the concrete and stayed silent. A voice carried through the storm, flat and cold. "Come out." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Coda's lips lifted just enough to show the edge of teeth. No sound escaped him. His muscles tightened until Rhys could feel the vibration through the leash, a coiled spring held back by training and trust. Footsteps crunched closer. Rhys shifted his weight, placing himself between the mouth of the tunnel and Silas. He adjusted his stance to keep his silhouette broken, one shoulder higher than the other, minimizing what the light could read. The storm screamed overhead, a living thing that punished mistakes. The beam stopped at the entrance. A man stepped into partial view, boots planted wide for balance. He was tall and thick through the chest, wrapped in a black winter shell dusted white. A scarf covered the lower half of his face, but Rhys could see the eyes, dark, focused, unhurried. His beard, trimmed short, showed frost along the edges. This was not someone panicking in a blizzard. This was someone working. Behind him, another shape moved, slimmer, quicker, circling to cut off retreat. Rhys clocked the spacing, the patience. Professionals, or at least practiced. Last chance, the first man said. His tone didn't rise. You're not going anywhere. Koda's ears flattened. Reese let his breath out slowly through his nose. He didn't answer. Words would give shape to fear. He needed something else. Koda made the choice. Without warning, the dog shifted his weight and slipped sideways out of the tunnel, not forward toward the light, but up and to the right, vanishing into the storm with a controlled burst of speed. Snow exploded as he ran, paws kicking a false trail across the open ground toward the lake. "Dog!" someone shouted. Flashlights swung wide. Footsteps broke formation. Reese waited 3 heartbeats. Then he moved. He hauled Silas up just enough to reposition him deeper into the tunnel, dragging him along the wall where shadows pooled thickest. Reese pulled a length of rescue cord from his pack and looped it around a rusted rebar stub protruding from the concrete, an anchor left behind when the road had been reinforced decades ago. He tied it with hands that remembered knots learned under worse conditions. Outside, the storm swallowed sound again. Koda's movement drew the men farther out, away from the tunnel mouth. Reese could hear them now, boots slipping, curses swallowed by wind. A beam flashed toward the lake, then jerked away. Reese leaned close to Silas. "When I say go, you crawl. Don't stand. Don't look back." Silas nodded, eyes bright with fear and resolve. A sharp crack echoed across the ice. Not a gunshot, ice fracturing. Reese felt it in his teeth. Someone had stepped too close to the masked weak spot. Water surged up, dark against white, and the storm carried a shout that cut off abruptly. Reese didn't waste the opening. He pulled the cord tight and guided Silas forward, inch by inch, using the tunnel's curve to keep them hidden. The cold burned his hands raw, but he kept moving, counting breaths, measuring distance by touch. Outside, the lights scattered, confusion fracturing the neat pattern they'd held before. Someone shouted orders. Another voice answered, sharper now, edged with anger. Koda reappeared out of the storm like a shadow given muscle, sliding back into the tunnel mouth with snow packed into his coat and eyes blazing. He took position again without instruction, chest heaving once before settling. Reese squeezed the dog's neck, a brief pressure that said everything he couldn't risk speaking. They waited. The storm howled, the lake groaned, and time stretched thin as ice. The storm gave Reese what he needed: noise, confusion, and cover. He counted the seconds between gusts, watching the snow lift and fall like a curtain. When the wind peaked, he moved. Not fast, precise. He slid the rescue cord through his gloved hands and checked the angle one last time, eyes tracing the line Koda had already drawn with his body and his will. Koda waited at Reese's knee, coat crusted with ice, breath controlled. At 8 years old, he no longer burned energy the way he once had, but his focus had sharpened into something quieter and more exact. His amber eyes tracked the scatter of lights beyond the ridge, mapping paths the way dogs did, by pattern and pressure rather than distance. Reese rose and gave a single, shallow whistle. Barely a sound, more vibration than note. Koda broke away. He ran not straight for the lake, but across it, cutting a false diagonal through drifting snow, paws striking just hard enough to mark a trail and just light enough to keep himself safe. Reese felt the pull of the leash leave his wrist and trusted the rest to training and trust. Shouts rose. Flashlights snapped wide. The pursuit split. That was the moment Reese had been waiting for. He pulled the cord hard, and stepped back. The cord went taut against the buried anchor, and the overhung drift above the approach slumped, then collapsed in a heavy, rolling slide. Snow fell in a dense wall, swallowing the narrow path and forcing the pursuers to halt or detour. No violence. Just terrain doing what terrain always did to impatience. Rhys turned to Silas. "Now," he said. Silas didn't argue. He crawled the way Rhys had told him to, hands numb, teeth clenched against pain, moving on determination when strength ran out. Rhys stayed close, a hand on Silas's shoulder, adjusting his weight so the old man never had to carry himself alone. The storm shifted again, wind veering north, opening a brief window of sky. The satellite messenger chirped. Once, twice, then steady. Rhys felt his chest loosen for the first time that night. He angled the device upward and held it there until the confirmation blinked back. Coordinates sent, distress acknowledged. Coda returned at a lope, sliding to a stop beside them with snow packed along his flanks. He checked Silas with a quick glance, then moved to Rhys's left, body angled outward, ready to lead. They followed the dog through timber Rhys would never have chosen on his own. Coda took them along shallow rises and through stands where the wind scoured snow thin, avoiding pockets that would swallow a boot or a man. Twice they froze as lights reappeared at distance, and twice the storm swallowed those lights again. The sound came before the sight. A deep mechanical thrum pushed through the wind, steady and growing. Rhys tipped his head back and saw it. Navigation lights blinking faintly through cloud and snow. A rescue helicopter slid into view, nose pointed into the gale, rotors beating the storm into submission. Coda led them to a small clearing Rhys hadn't known was there, a place where the trees pulled back just enough to offer space without exposure. Rhys flared the emergency strobe once, then killed it, trusting the pilot to do the rest. The helicopter settled low, not touching down, just enough for a cable to drop. A rescuer came down the line, female, mid-30s, compact and strong, hair pulled into a tight braid beneath her helmet. Her name patch read Mara Collins. Her eyes were calm and assessing, the look of someone who had learned to keep fear folded away until later. She moved to Silas immediately, hands quick and gentle, voice steady as she assessed the leg and the signs of exposure. "You did right," she told him, not as comfort, but as fact. Rhys helped lift Silas into the harness. The old man's face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. He caught Rhys's sleeve with cold fingers and nodded once. Thanks, without ceremony. As Silas rose, a shout echoed from the tree line. Rhys turned. Sheriff's lights flashed blue and red through the storm beyond the ridge, cutting the dark into pieces. Snowmobiles surged forward, engines snarling. The pursuers broke and ran, but the storm had closed the exits they'd counted on. One vehicle skidded into view, a dark utility truck half hidden by trees, plates caked with ice. Deputies converged, weapons low but ready, voices sharp with command. It ended not with a shot, but with doors opening, hands raised, and the sound of cuffs snapping through the wind. The helicopter lifted, carrying Silas toward warmth and light. Rhys knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Coda's. The dog's breath was hot against his skin, a small miracle in the cold. Rhys unclipped the collar and let it hang loose in his hand. "Het niem vu," he said softly. Coda didn't leave. He stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes on the forest, tail still, as if he were making sure nothing else tried to rise from the snow. Only when the last light disappeared and the engines faded did he turn back to Reese. Weeks later, the cabin smelled of coffee instead of cold. Silas healed slower than he liked, but faster than the doctors expected. He walked with a cane now, stubborn as frost, insisting on doing things himself, even when his leg ached. He brought bread once a week and left it on Reese's porch without knocking, a quiet habit that suited them both. The investigation moved like winter thaw, slow, inevitable. The truck led to contracts. The contracts led to routes. The routes led to names that preferred darkness and snow. None of it touched Reese directly, and he was grateful for that. One morning, Reese stood at the edge of the trees with Coda beside him, the world pale and clean after a fresh fall. Reese held the old collar, then set it on a hook by the door. Coda stepped forward into the snow, paused, and looked back. The forest waited. Sometimes we think miracles have to be loud. We expect thunder, bright signs, or a moment when the world stops and explains itself. But most miracles come quietly. They come in the form of a man who refuses to walk away, a dog who chooses the right path when no one is watching, a storm that hides danger and at the same time hides a way out. In moments like that, it isn't strength that saves us. It's obedience to something deeper, a nudge we can't explain, a choice to help when fear says leave. The Bible reminds us the Lord watches over those who love him. And sometimes God sends help through the most unexpected hands, 4 paws, a stranger in the snow, or a quiet courage we didn't know we still had. If you've ever felt buried by life, by loss, exhaustion, or fear, remember this: the snow does not get the final word. God is still working, even when you can't see the path. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you're praying for right now. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing stories of courage, faith, and compassion. May God bless you and your family, keep you safe, and guide you through every season of your life.